Friends, folks often wonder how a person clothed in self-centeredness, control, and emotional coldness can remain married for 2 or 3 decades. Oughtn't the false front drop? Oughtn't the partner go? Still, many narcissists stay married for their whole lives. The explanation is not love in the true sense. It concerns staying alive, self-image, and framework. Narcissists build relationship worlds that others become tangled in so closely that leaving feels like falling from a great height. These unions are not chance. They follow designs that are old, mental, and profoundly human. And once you notice the design, you cannot ignore it. A narcissist depends on their spouse for much more than just friendship or partnership. They rely on them to hold up the frail image they have built of themselves. At the center of a narcissistic personality is not certainty, but terror, a fear of being plain, unimportant, unnoticed. They carry a deep, often unspoken belief that without praise or affirmation from others, they will crumble into nothingness. So the spouse becomes something like a psychological support. Not a partner in the usual way, but the person who confirms their self-image every day. They are the mirror that reflects back the grand image the narcissist wants to believe is real. This need is not always clear in the beginning. Early in the relationship, the narcissist may appear bigger than life, full of charm, drive, and passion. Their affection feels focused and powerful, like a spotlight that warms the spirit. To be picked by them feels like being lifted above the normal world. The spouse often feels special, seen, and valued. But the truth is that the narcissist is not admiring the spouse for who they are. They are admiring how the spouse causes them to feel. They are drawn to the mirror image of themselves they see in the spouse's eyes. Over time, this way of acting deepens. The narcissist needs steady affirmation, and not in the casual way most people do. They need to be admired, agreed with, respected, and served as if their sense of self depends on it, because it does. When the spouse supports their successes or praises their best points, it fills the narcissist with a sense of power and purpose. But when the spouse questions them, criticizes them, or simply stops responding with admiration, the narcissist feels it as a danger, not just a disagreement, but an attack on their identity. This is what leads to anger, defending oneself, blame shifting, or emotional pulling away. They are trying to bring back the stability of the image they feel is slipping. The spouse, meanwhile, begins to learn the rules. Praise brings calm. Agreement brings peace. Disagreement brings conflict, emotional coldness, or punishment. So slowly, almost without noticing, the spouse changes. They become careful with their words, their tone, their needs. They start managing the narcissist's emotional state. They may stop saying their own desires. They may shrink, quiet their voice, or forget parts of themselves to keep things smooth. They may even start believing that the narcissist's reality is the real one. And this is where the long-lasting bond is formed. The narcissist is not purposely planning this. They are defending the only weak structure they have to hold themselves together. The spouse, often caring or patient by nature, becomes the caretaker of that structure. The relationship lasts not because it is healthy or satisfying, but because the narcissist sorely needs the spouse to prevent the collapse of their identity. And the spouse becomes part of that role so deeply that stepping away feels like breaking apart the world they have lived inside for years. The beginning of the relationship with a narcissist often feels like a dream. It has a drawing quality and intensity that feels uncommon. The narcissist seems deeply attentive, curious, and emotionally tuned in. They listen closely. They study what the other person values, what they hope for, what they fear. Then they change themselves into the perfect match. It feels like fate. This stage is not by chance. It is the phase of making the other person perfect, where the narcissist places the spouse on a high spot not out of true love, but because admiration is the money they are trying to get. In this stage, everything is great. They give affection freely, express admiration easily, and create an emotional high that can feel addictive. The spouse often feels understood in a way they never have before. The narcissist mirrors their dreams, reflects their strengths, and increases their sense of importance. They might say things like, "No one has ever made me feel this way," or "We're different from everyone else." This creates a tie that feels rare and cannot be replaced. The spouse believes they have found a connection that is uniquely deep and meant to be. They fall in love not just with the person, but with the way the relationship makes them feel about themselves. This is the hook, but slowly, almost without being seen, the way things work begins to change. The narcissist cannot keep up that level of idealization forever. Once the spouse is emotionally attached, the narcissist no longer needs to impress. Instead, they begin to shape the spouse to fit their emotional needs. The high spot becomes a platform of what they expect. The spouse is no longer admired for who they are, but judged for how well they keep on admiring the narcissist. The spouse tries to return to the warmth of the beginning. They try to be supportive, loving, and patient. They try to make again the magic that felt so real. But the warmth now appears only when the narcissist feels confirmed. Their affection becomes dependent on conditions. The spouse learns that love will be given only when they reflect admiration, agreement, and loyalty. The initial idealization becomes the memory the spouse chases. This is how emotional attachment becomes firmly fixed. The spouse remembers the version of the narcissist who made them feel special, and they believe that version still exists somewhere beneath the criticism, the pulling away, or the emotional distance. They keep trying to bring them back. The original connection becomes both the reason the spouse stays and the source of their pain. Idealization is powerful because it binds through meaning, intimacy, and affirmation. It builds a bond that is not easily broken. The spouse does not feel controlled, they feel chosen, and the thought of letting go of that feeling can feel like giving up on the most important relationship they've ever had. That is how the bond forms, and that bond is what can hold the marriage in place for decades. Over time, the spouse learns the emotional landscape of the relationship. They begin to understand what brings calm and what starts storms. At first, they may try to state their needs directly. They may try to talk about hurt feelings, disappointment, or confusion, but instead of being met with understanding, they are often met with defensiveness, criticism, or being brushed off. The narcissist sees emotional requests as demands or fault-finding. They view being open from others as uncomfortable, even threatening. So, the spouse starts to adjust, not all at once, but slowly, little by little, in subtle trade-offs that pile up over the years. They choose their words more carefully. They soften their tone. They stop talking about certain topics. They avoid anything that could be seen as criticism. Instead of saying what they truly feel, they learn to put first what will keep the peace. The relationship becomes managed rather than lived. They begin to change themselves, and the changing is silent. The spouse may notice that moments of closeness only occur when the narcissist feels admired or in control. So admiration becomes a tool. They comfort. They praise. They make things work because those actions bring brief moments of warmth or steadiness. And for someone who remembers the early idealization, even small moments of affection feel precious. The relationship becomes a cycle of distance and trying to get close. The spouse tries to bring back the connection, while the narcissist responds only when they feel confirmed. Over time, the spouse's own identity begins to fade. They may lose confidence in their thoughts. They may start doubting their own emotional needs. They may begin to believe that speaking up for themselves is selfish or not right. The narcissist often makes this belief stronger by suggesting that any emotional discomfort is the spouse's fault. Statements like, "You're too sensitive, you're making too big a deal out of it," or "You never see the value in everything I do," become common. These phrases do not simply ignore the spouse's feelings, they change reality. The spouse eventually questions themselves rather than the dynamic. This psychological wearing away does not happen loudly. It happens quietly, like water eroding stone. The spouse becomes smaller in order to fit into the emotional space the narcissist allows. They may separate from friends or family, either because the narcissist suggested it or because they feel ashamed to reveal the truth. Their emotional world shrinks. Their needs become less important than the narcissist's constant need for confirmation. And yet, to the outside world, they may look like the supportive partner, the patient spouse, the steady force in the relationship. People may admire their strength or loyalty, unaware that those qualities are the same ones keeping them stuck. The spouse becomes a caregiver for the narcissist's worries, often at the cost of their own emotional health. This gradual loss of self is one of the most powerful reasons these marriages last. The spouse is not weak. They are deeply caught up. They've been taught to believe that peace depends on their silence, that love means giving things up, and that their identity must bend to keep the relationship whole. A narcissist may seem confident, bossy, even firm on the surface, but beneath that exterior lies a deep fear of being left alone. This fear is not always easy to see. It often hides behind great pride, aloofness, or emotional distance, but it is real and it shapes the entire relationship. The narcissist needs the marriage to stay intact because the spouse represents stability, identity, and emotional fuel. If the spouse leaves, the narcissist is forced to face the emptiness they have spent their entire life avoiding. So they hold on, not out of love, as most would define it, but out of psychological necessity. This fear of abandonment does not reveal itself as being open to hurt. Instead, it often appears as control. The narcissist may try to shape the spouse's world, influence who they see, what they do, or how they think. They may make subtle or direct comments about how no one else would understand them, support them, or stay with them. They might create an environment where leaving feels impossible, or where the spouse begins to doubt their ability to survive without the relationship. Control becomes a guard against abandonment. When conflict arises, the narcissist does not seek connection or understanding. They seek to bring back dominance. Losing an argument feels like losing power, and losing power feels like losing safety. This is why disagreements get bigger so quickly. The narcissist experiences emotional challenges as dangers to their very identity. They may shout, pull away, make the spouse feel guilty, or turn blame back on the spouse. Their goal is not solving the problem, it is making their self-image stable again. Yet when there is a real risk of the spouse pulling away, something changes. The narcissist may suddenly become warm, affectionate, saying sorry, or attentive. They may bring back the early idealization, bringing back charm that had long disappeared. The spouse might think, "This is the person I fell in love with," and hope returns. But this shift is not lasting. It is planned, often unconscious. The moment the danger of abandonment passes, the old patterns come back. The cycle starts over. This push and pull way of acting creates emotional confusion. The spouse sees quick views of the loving partner they once knew, so they stay. They believe change is possible. They hold on to hope. Meanwhile, the narcissist holds on to the spouse not because they want to truly know them, but because they require what the spouse provides: attention, stability, admiration, identity, support. The fear of abandonment also means the narcissist rarely ends the relationship themselves. They may cut off emotion, but they rarely walk away completely. The spouse becomes part of their psychological base, like a supporting pole in a house that looks grand from the outside but is weak within. Removing that pole would mean crashing down. So the marriage continues. The narcissist fights to keep it not through empathy or growth, but through emotional patterns that make sure the spouse remains tied to them. And the spouse, shaped by years of fitting in, often stays because the bond is as much internal as external. This is how a relationship built on fear can last a lifetime. In many long-lasting marriages involving a narcissistic partner, the relationship is made stronger not just by emotional patterns, but by external structures that make leaving feel too much. Life becomes deeply mixed together. There are shared homes, shared duties, shared finances, social groups, family traditions, children, and a history that cannot simply be put aside. These shared elements create a sense of not changing, a feeling that the relationship is not just a choice, but the framework of life itself. Children often play a large role in why the marriage remains whole. The spouse may want to maintain stability for them, avoid conflict, or keep them safe from emotional upset. The narcissist frequently uses this reality to their benefit. They may present themselves as the strong or smart parent while subtly showing the spouse as emotional or not making sense. This way of acting can create guilt and confusion for the spouse, making them believe leaving would hurt the children, even if staying is equally damaging. The narcissist understands this emotionally or naturally and uses the children as a silent anchor, sometimes without even knowing it. Finances are another tying force. Narcissists often manage money, access to resources, or career chances. They may discourage the spouse from working, moving up professionally, or building self-reliance. Over time, the spouse may become financially dependent or fear the cost of splitting up. Money is not just currency in these relationships, it becomes a structure of power. Even if the spouse is able and smart, they may feel trapped by the thought of starting over, especially after years of emotional wearing away. Social expectations also play a powerful role. From the outside, the relationship may look stable, successful, or admirable. Narcissists often maintain a perfect public image. They present themselves as committed, charming, and dedicated. Friends, family, or community members may see the marriage as something to admire. The spouse, aware of this view, may feel misunderstood or unsupported. They worry that if they tried to explain the truth, no one would believe them. The fear of not being seen or confirmed keeps them silent and stuck. There is also the weight of time itself. When years pass inside such a relationship, the spouse may question whether leaving would mean that all those years were wasted. This thought can be deeply painful. The longer the marriage lasts, the harder it becomes to imagine life outside of it. The past becomes a reason to stay, even when the present is draining. But perhaps the strongest binding force is hope. The spouse remembers the beginning. They remember the warmth, the admiration, the excitement, the emotional closeness that felt unlike anything they had ever known. They hold on to the belief that the relationship can return to what it once was. Hope becomes both their strength and their cage. These external structures create an environment where staying feels easier than leaving. Even when staying costs the spouse their emotional health, the marriage remains not because it is satisfying or even, but because the life built around it feels too heavy to take apart. Seeing the truth is the moment the pattern begins to fall apart, even if nothing changes right away. For years, the spouse may feel something is wrong but cannot name it. They may believe they are the problem, that they are failing the relationship, or that they simply need to try harder. The narcissist often pushes this belief, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly. But eventually there comes a moment where the spouse sees the pattern clearly. It may come in a quiet realization, a sudden emotional breakdown, or a conversation that finally ends the illusion. It may come from reading something that matches their experience, hearing another person tell their story, or simply becoming tired of holding both sides of the emotional burden. Seeing the truth is the shift from confusion to knowing what it is. Once the spouse understands the way things work, they can no longer not see it. They begin to look back on past conversations, past arguments, past cycles, and realize they were not messy or random. They followed a script. They begin to see how they got used to it, how they made themselves quiet, how they made their needs small. Instead of thinking, I am too demanding, they begin thinking, my needs have never been allowed. That simple shift alters everything. However, seeing the truth does not automatically lead to leaving or fighting back. Often the first stage of awareness is grief. The spouse must face the truth that the person they fell in love with may have never really existed in the way they believed. The early idealization was not true closeness, but emotional planning. The warmth they chased was not love coming back, but confirmation temporarily brought back. This realization can feel heavy, painful, and deeply confusing. The spouse is not just grieving the relationship, they are grieving the story they lived inside of. Yet seeing the truth also wakes up strength. It allows the spouse to get back their voice in small steps. They may begin to express limits. They may stop apologizing for feelings that are real. They may reconnect with old interests, friendships, or parts of themselves they gave up. These small acts of coming back to self begin to shift the balance in the relationship. The narcissist usually feels the shift and acts against it. The reactions may be anger, guilt, pressure, charm revival, or emotional pulling away. But now the spouse sees the pattern, so the power of the pattern gets weaker. Sometimes seeing the truth leads to leaving. Sometimes it leads to rebuilding the emotional dynamic. Sometimes it leads to deep inner healing without any change to the outside relationship. The direction is different, but the change begins the same way, with the spouse recognizing their own value. Again, when a person sees themselves not as a support of someone else's identity, but as a full human being with their own needs, desires, voice, and truth, the relationship's old structure cannot remain whole. Awareness may not break the marriage right away, but it breaks the spell. It brings back choice where there was once only survival.